So I imagine with your role previously as like a baseball coach, you've read, or at least read people who've talked about like Kay Anders Ericsson's discussions on like deliberate practice and like how to develop like skills and expertise in like sports and whatnot. I'm wondering, how have you kind of applied your understandings of practice into your own abilities as an educator or a researcher?
Well, that's a great question. One thing that is most striking is that progress is invisible, right? So we used to talk about it's just the sitting on the bucket. And so when you sit on the bucket, you do soft toss, you just toss the ball to kids and let them hit it, right? Sometimes you just need to sit there and toss 300 balls. You won't see the young person getting better because you can't. You see the results weeks and months and years later,
Yep.
but you have to sit there and toss the ball. The bottom line is enabling opportunity is where growth happens. And so in the same way, in learning in classroom situations, it is giving the kids opportunities to explain and struggle is where learning happens, but it's invisible. One of the assignments I give to my teacher ed students every day is videotape learning happening. And inevitably, it's a catch-22, is they need to see actual learning happen. So what would it look like? And they struggle with it every year. And I do it on purpose to get at the heart of how would I know when a person is learning? And the only way to really get that evidence is some formative assessments to give opportunity for the students to explain. And it's got to be iterative so you can see them shifting in these explanations. And so the parallels are pretty rich in that context. Is we need to be more student-centered, give the students more opportunities and reduce their anxiety, because a kid who can't struggle in practice and get it wrong is a kid who's not going to grow, right? And so similarly, a person who is uncomfortable offering an incorrect answer is going to have a hard time growing. We have to be comfortable in our discomfort.
Yeah, my ringtone for my cell phone is a recording of the 5th grade band I used to teach playing Hot Cross Buns the first time through. And so I recorded that, and then for our final concert, I'd play it for the parents right before we'd then play Hot Cross Buns and be like, yeah, I'm sure you remember having your clarinet just like squeaking and squawking, but like look at how much growth has happened over those months. And it's something that is so gradual you don't notice it.
I love it. No one ever says that terrible music is the precursor for the maestros, right? We see the end product, but we didn't hear the horrible music that preceded it. And it translates to every endeavor, right? Is that at some level, the first stage is for us to struggle through the process. I use an analogy that riding bikes requires us to have some support, to do it independently and fall fairly regularly. And then you're cruising, right? You're off on your own and you're efficient and you never have to look back. And those who are successful are the people who can navigate that in-between process, who can go through stage 1 and 2 to get to that final stage. But as a teacher, I have to grow comfortable where all my kids are in those first few stages, right? And I need to be so encouraging that I can get them there, because showing up is really the only requirement.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll be one of the biggest things that parents in particular will understand, just how patient teachers have to be and are with the kids that they work with.
Absolutely. There's no way the respect for teaching won't change. Well, I would argue too, and I've been thinking about this recently, there's a quote from Lee Schulman that says the most calamitous insult to teachers is this idea that those who cannot do teach. And the ridiculous nature of that is that you can't teach what you don't know.
Yeah.
And you can't teach it well if you don't know it intimately, and if you don't know how to teach it in the context of the kids' lives. And so part of what people are learning now is that our feigned expertise, what we thought teaching was, is absolutely not what we thought it was. And as people are at home struggling to figure out why their children are having a hard time, it shows just how valuable teaching is and how difficult teaching is. And I hope there's a heightened awareness that is met with policy and support for teachers as we move forward, because we're never going to get this time back. And this year of trying to adjust to distance learning is going to produce some positive things, but I think it's going to require us to really be much better as educators broadly.
Yeah, and to be able to communicate outside of just the field and with other teachers, but to be able to communicate those struggles and whatnot with parents, so that way they can better understand it. I was at a conference, it was a panel session, and one of the people on the panel was like a hedge fund manager or something. It was very random, but it was a panel for educators. And at one point, this person said something along the lines like, well, I don't want people to come out of school to become science teachers. I want them to become actual scientists. And like people like raise their hand and like question that, like, excuse me? So it was really interesting seeing the response. And that person definitely backed down after that. They realized they made a mistake.
Where do the scientists come from? It is amazing that we forget the resource that produced the excellence. There's a false crisis in America as well. I feel like we look at the so-called crisis in education out of a few broken lenses. And the first is that we didn't have a way of measuring our international success until 1995 with the Third International Math and Science Study. And so before that, we just believed we were tops in the world. We just didn't have any evidence, right? And so when the evidence showed up, we found out, well, maybe we're not the best. But what we're clear about is as we produce a highly literate citizenship, as we graduate students in high volumes, as people go to colleges and universities in the US, they're full of talented students who are doing world-class science. And the science that we're doing in the US is so good that people from all over the world come to the United States to do research because our research at the university level and teaching at the university level is the best in the world. Well, how did it get that way? Is it because the international students are here? And I would argue we're refusing to recognize the contribution of excellent science educators right here in the US who are producing world-class scholars. Now, the issue is that the volume of who those people are, right? If we do an L-shaped curve, we need a larger population that includes people from all backgrounds to be in that group of excellence. But I think we're missing what's actually happening right now in the US schools and universities across the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also see the same thing with just education in general. So there are a lot of people from around the world coming here, reading the research, citing the research, but there's not necessarily a lot of application of that research in classroom context for a variety of reasons, like politicians not understanding it and whatnot. One of the things with like the unpacking scholarship episodes that I do for this podcast, like alternating each week between an episode and when I like take scholarship, unpack it, what does this mean in the classroom? One of the reasons why I do that is because I see that disconnect and I want to try and bridge that gap. So that way practitioners can like learn from scholars and whatnot.
There's a systemic problem is people in my position at a Research One institution, your assessment is about scholarship recognition among scholars. And so part of what we're paid to do is to engage in research that researchers read. And it's not that we're not paid to do teacher-based research. It's just that during those initial stages as a younger scholar, there's greater weight paid to research that goes to researchers. And so part of what needs to happen is greater valuing of work that goes directly to teachers.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 53, which is titled Situated Language and Learning with Bryan Brown. You can listen to this full episode as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast or by going to jaredoleary.com.